And welcome back. This is the next to last session of the virtual residency workshop for 2021. It's Friday, June 11th. Now we have for you the Cyberinfrastructure funding landscape. Our moderator is Bar van Oosen, and I'm just going to turn the microphone over to Bar, and you all go wild.
Thanks, Henry. So good afternoon, everyone. So Bar van Oosen, I'm the Associate Vice President for the Office of Advanced Research Computing at Rutgers University. So I am moderator. So I will not be one of the presenters, but I will sort of try and keep people on time and be able to get the questions to the panelists as best I can. I'm also, go after a lot of the grants that will be talked about today, so I can certainly chime in if needed. So the format, let's see, I'm going to share my screen real quick. All right, so as Henry said, this is the CI funding landscape, and we've got a good group of people presenting today. So Hal Finkel from the U.S. Department of Energy, Office of Science, Alan Sussman, National Science Foundation, Mike Renfro from Tennessee Tech University, Amit Sharma, Wright State University, and Scott Valcourt from Northeastern University. So we've got a good mix of funding agencies and universities, and each will sort of approach it, sharing it from their perspective as we talk about the CI funding landscape. Format of the session will be the presenters in this order will give a short presentation, introduce themselves, talk a little bit about what they do at their institution or organization, and programs and funding that they've been involved in. And then at the end, we'll open it up to questions. So I hope all of you will bring lots of questions to these panelists. They've got a wealth of knowledge and willing to share lots of ideas and their thoughts. So without me taking up too much time, I will stop my sharing and hand it over to Hal.
Okay, Bar, thank you very much for the invitation to be part of this panel. Give me a moment and I will share my slides. All right, can you see my slide now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so thank you very much. So my name is Hal Finkel. I'm a program manager for computer science research in the U.S. Department of Energy's Office of Science Advanced Scientific Computing Research Program, which we call OSCAR. And just to set some context, OSCAR has 3 divisions. They're all 3 of which are relevant for cyber infrastructure. We have a facilities division, which deploys some of the largest supercomputers in the world at national user facilities for open scientific research. We have leadership scale machines at Argonne's facility, at Oak Ridge's facility, capacity computing facility at NERSC, which is at Berkeley, and ESNet, which is a network that connects all of these facilities together, plus connects to a number of different academic institutions and institutions in other parts of the world. And then on the right side of the slide here, we have a division called the Advanced Computing Technologies Division, ACT, which has work in a number of advanced computing technologies, starting from quantum through advanced microelectronics, cybersecurity work, and emerging technologies such as neuromorphic computing. Now we have the third division, the one that I'm in, is the research division. And there are kind of 3 subcomponents. There's a component that is called computational partnerships, where we fund collaborative activities between mathematics and computer science researchers and discipline scientists in order to bring innovation from the applied math and computer science side, infuse that with discipline in science in other areas of science that are within the Department of Energy's mission space. And we do that primarily through several programs. Many of them have CyDAC in the name. So there's a website here, cydac.gov, that you can go to learn more about those. Then in terms of fundamental research, we have applied mathematics, which focuses on things like scalable numerical algorithms, machine learning, data analysis, uncertainty quantification, and so on. And then there's computer science, where I am. And our focus is on innovative software and tools that make high performance computers and networks productive, efficient, enable large scale scalable workflows, fair data, and so on. If you'd like to have more of a narrative on these things, of course, you can visit the website. There's also a forward-looking description that's part of the FY22 budget request, and that's linked on the slides. Okay. So just to kind of give a brief idea of kind of where, what are the different entry points for funding for cyber infrastructure in Oscar. I've sort of highlighted the main ones here, and different ones are applicable depending on sort of where you are in your career and your institution. So starting from the beginning, if you are a graduate student or going to be a graduate student, then I highly recommend you check out our Computational Science Graduate Fellowship, CSGF, which provides funding for graduate fellows in a wide range of areas that are of relevance to the Department of Energy and the Office of Science. If you are an early career researcher, that means, to us, it means someone within 10 years of earning your PhD, then you can apply for an early career research grant. The scope for these tends to be fairly broad, and these provide research grants for 5 years to fund a research program that is proposed in the grant. For university-based researchers, that means about $150,000 a year. That would cover part of your summer salary and also graduate student or postdoc or what have you. And the interesting thing about early career awards is that they will travel with you if you change institutions, which is something that is perhaps more common for people who are earlier in their careers. If you are at a small business or interested in starting a small business, we have programs for that. There are programs under the SBIR and STTR offices. SBIR is the Small Business Innovation Research Program, and STTR focuses on technology transfer from the labs. And these provide funding for grants for small businesses. Small in this case doesn't necessarily mean that small. It's businesses that have 500 or fewer employees, including affiliates. And you can get a phase 1 or a phase 2 grant. There are phase 3s as well. The phase 1s are small, sort of exploratory grants, $200,000 for 6 to 12 months. The phase 2s are up to $1 million, and subcontracting is permitted. So people at academic institutions who are collaborating with people at small businesses can get funding through this venue. And for both early career and for SBIR, the topics are generally released in the summer, and pre-applications are generally due in the fall. Now, on top of that, of course, we have targeted funding opportunities in a wide array of areas. The funding opportunities are announced on our website. They're also announced through grants.gov, as are most funding opportunities that come out from the federal government. And as a hint, if you'd like to get notifications of these, you can sign up on grants.gov for email notifications. You can search for Oscar. It's important, of course, to read each grant carefully because they're all different in many different respects. But depending on the announcement, they support between 2 and 5 year projects. University researchers can apply directly, and please do coordinate with your organization-sponsored research office if you do so. And subcontracting is often permitted, and sometimes collaborative applications are permitted as well. I can talk more about those if there are questions later. And the other kind of funding announcement that we put out are DOE laboratory announcements. These are only open to national labs, to DOE national labs, to respond directly. But subcontracting is often allowed, and other organizations and collaborators at universities and academic institutions are often funded under these awards, but they're done as subcontracts to the national laboratories. And just in case you're not familiar, there are 17 national laboratories focused on many different areas of science, and they are spread throughout the country. If you are interested in sort of learning more about the funding opportunities that are available, I encourage you to do a couple of things. So one is, of course, you can look on our website for the currently available funding opportunities, but the past opportunities are also listed there. There's a page that lists those, and you can go and look at those and see what kinds of things we ask for and what kind of areas in which we're interested. You can also look at the public abstracts for the current awards. So you can browse through which awards are currently have currently been made and what they're focused on and how the PIs there describe their work. And the other thing is that the way that we often do funding opportunities is that they are preceded by community workshops that gather feedback from the research community on what the research needs are in particular spaces of interest to us. And those workshops often produce reports. These are nice reports. They have a lot of background material. A lot of time goes into preparing them, but they also highlight particular priority research directions, and we draw on that information when we compose funding opportunities. Those are also posted on our website, and I definitely recommend that you check those out. So let me just conclude here by pointing out some areas that we think are important for the future. To do this, I'm going to highlight specifically the areas that are called out by our Federal Advisory Committee, ASCAC. They produced a report for us very recently. It was called Transitioning OSCAR After ECP. Here, ECP refers to the xScale Computing Project. And they highlight for computer science a number of different areas that are of particular interest. And so, without making any guarantees in this regard, I can certainly point you to the areas that our Federal Advisory Committee believes are interesting for our future. And these, of course, include things like computer architecture, dealing with advanced specialization, heterogeneous computing, and new devices, with a particular emphasis on balanced computing architectures, things that take better account of data movement requirements and other requirements that are not directly tied to sort of raw compute capability. Performance portability, dealing with being able to take applications and run them across various different kinds of architectures, having data management and distributed workflows, dealing with complex storage hierarchies. There are, there's a particular interest, of course, in data and in the distributed data ecosystem, making sure data is fairly available, that it maps onto sort of high-speed capabilities locally in terms of storage, but also can be federated and modeled in a distributed fashion. Edge computing, there's a large amount of data. Of course, it comes off of detectors, off of experiments, and other places where data is generated. And dealing with that data by sort of centralizing it all in one common place to analyze it is likely not going to be practical in the future. And so we have to deal with that. This includes things like 5G and distributed wireless sensors. Of course, all this has to be done in a way that preserves correctness, ensures reproducibility, and other key aspects of science, and also is productive. And so we have a call out here to recognize that productive use of computers often now involves things like Python and Julia, Jupyter notebooks, and PyTorch, and AI libraries, and integrating those are going to be important. All that has to be done with respecting security requirements that are important for various fields of scientific research. And lastly, I'll highlight that the networking space is also changing very quickly. And new capabilities there are certainly seem to be in our future. So that's the end of my remarks. I'm very happy to be here and to answer any questions that you might have. Thanks.
Thank you, Hal. So Alan Sussman is next.
Sure, let me share my screen, well, at least my slides. And I hope everybody can see that. It's filling my display. My name is Alan Sussman. I'm a program director in the Office of Advanced Cyber Infrastructure, which is part of the Computer and Information Science and Engineering Directorate at the National Science Foundation. So my main responsibilities, and you can tell from the title of this talk, are learning and workforce development, but I'm also involved in software and data programs, so I can answer questions about those, although the talk is mainly going to focus on learning and workforce development programs. I'm what's called a rotator, which means that I'm only temporary. I'm actually a professor of computer science at the University of Maryland. So in terms of, I'll just give a quick introduction. I think most people know what the Office of Advanced Cyber Infrastructure is about. I've seen a lot of familiar faces in the audience. This is sort of the big picture in terms of cyber infrastructure ecosystem to transform science and engineering. And the key things are what OAC supports is research cyber infrastructure. Okay, so that means basically cyber infrastructure to support scientific and engineering research and research on cyber infrastructure. It's both directions. Okay, and cyber infrastructure is construed very broadly. And here, this is a picture of sort of all the kinds of things that go on in our office. And what I really like to highlight is that, what's at the top is people and organizations and communities, right? That's connecting all of these different services, hardware, software, all the tools to enable research. And I borrowed this from our division director. So let me talk about communities. Okay, so there are actually 3 different communities of concern, and I see, again, representatives of all 3 of these. We're talking about what we call cyber infrastructure contributors who develop new capabilities. Okay, new cyber infrastructure capabilities and new science and engineering capabilities. We have CI users, which are typically what we call, again, as a computer scientist, I call domain area scientists, scientific domains, scientific engineering domains, that are going to exploit these new capabilities, new cyber infrastructure capabilities. And then we have cyber infrastructure professionals. That's the professional staff to deploy and support all those new capabilities, basically connect the tools and the hardware to the researchers to enable them to do the research. Those are the people connecting the parts. So in terms of programs, we have basically programs that face different areas. We have things for students, training students, and in this particular case, the one that I'm responsible for is research experiences for undergraduates. I'm not going to really talk about that so much, but we do support, that's an NSF-wide program. We do, as Hal talked about in the Department of Energy, we have also early career research programs. We actually do have a early career faculty program called Career, which again is NSF-wide, but we also have we're part of CRI, Computing Research Initiation Awards, and I'll talk a little bit more about those. For training and workforce development, we have the cyber training program that, again, I'm the OAC is the lead. I'm the lead program director, but actually has participation across all the directorates within NSF, and I'll talk more about that. And then on the more research side, we are part of the CISE's core research program. We actually participate in that. That's a solicitation across all of CISE. I'll talk a little bit more about that next. But the key thing there, is that OAC is now the only division with a deadline for the small size projects. We don't participate in the bigger projects, which the other divisions in size do. And we're the only ones that have a deadline. The current deadline is not listed yet, but it will be in mid-November sometime. So let me talk first about the cyber training program. So cyber training, as you can see, is short for training-based workforce development for advanced cyber infrastructure. And it has 2 goals this is all about research workforce preparation, not so much targeting industry, it's about research workforce, okay? Not talking about training for jobs in industry so much, other than research jobs. So we're looking at things like broader adoption of cyber infrastructure tools and methods, or curriculum and instruction material development. A lot of so training and curriculum development. There are 3 project classes. three sizes: pilots, which are typically exploratory, and you can see exploratory activities up to 2 years and $300,000. Then there are two kinds of implementation project classes that are more broadly accessible to the community. The small ones are up to 4 years and $500,000. The medium ones, which are bigger, up to $1 million in 4 years, those are definitely targeting fostering a community, building a community around a particular area, a particular group of people. There's different ways to do that. And then there are, in the current solicitation, large-scale project conceptualizations. We have a couple of those out there that are planning grants for potential, eventually larger cyber training projects or centers of excellence. We now have a program within OAC at centers of excellence that didn't exist when this solicitation was released. And again, we same three communities of concern that I already talked about: professionals, contributors, and users of cyber infrastructure. There's participation across all, really pretty much all the directorates in NSF, all the directorates. I think all except one might be listed, and then there's some of the divisions within there listed, but we're the lead. And of course, that also includes other parts of size. We've had really good community response. It's not, again, NSF, these programs tend not to be huge. We've been doing on the order of 10 to 12 awards per year. You can, again, find all the awards. You can do searches through the NSF awards search site. As Hal said, for DOE, you can find the titles, abstracts, and all the other there's some information about all the awards that have been made for this program over the last several years. The next deadline is in January. So let me talk a little bit more about the SIZE Research Initiative program. This is for, and this is not as well known as the career program, that's why I'm not going to talk about the career. This is really, in some sense, pre-career. This is for independent research for faculty or research scientists in their first 3 years. It's really targeting institutions that are under-resourced. So it's really looking for a lack of essential resources at the institution that the faculty or research scientist doesn't already have. So if it has restrictions about not having already had a federal grant as a PI, there's a chair letter that certifies lack of essential resources, but it is for both tenure track and research science and education positions. It's not just for tenure track faculty. The research focus, which I'll talk a little bit more about when I talk about our core research program, is on advanced cyber infrastructure research that's translational, use-inspired, multidisciplinary, and not just computational, not just computer scientists, but also computational and data scientists. And this is the size of the award. It's up to $175,000 for 2 years. The next deadline is in September. This is this solicitation just came out recently, the new solicitation. To finish up, I'll talk about a few other opportunities within OAC. There are the software and data programs, which I think a lot of you know about, things like the Cyber Infrastructure for Sustained Scientific Innovation, which should have a deadline in November, the Principles and Practice of Scalable Software. There are also things like we have a dear colleague letter on internships, non-academic graduate student research opportunities for students to go and work in, whether it's government labs or industry, as part of their dissertation research. We have, of course, do student travel grants to all sorts of things, and talk to me. And I really encourage everybody to subscribe to our mailing list. It has very low traffic, maybe one message a month, if you want to find out about things that are coming out in OAC. And with that, I am done.
Thank you.
So thank you.
Mike?
Got the screen, didn't get the audio. Okay. All right. So, hey, I'm Mike. I'm HPC Systems Administrator here at Tennessee Tech University, going on 4 years in that position. Spent another 17 as an R&D engineer in a research center here, where I did some research IT stuff and just some regular engineering. And so for this panel here, I wanted to tell y'all a reasonably short story, a quick rundown of a couple of science DMZ proposals that we've submitted in the last couple of years. So let's start with our 2019 program attempt. This was our first attempt at any CC Star or any really infrastructure type grant like this. And so, you know, we proposed a science DMZ like everybody does for CC Star networking. But in our case, we weren't going for just the usual router and switches and data transfer nodes and perf sonar monitoring. We added some stuff into our goal where we wanted to add some extra software defined networking. We're a heavy virtualization shop, and we wanted to use that to sort of get a lot more segmentation and isolation among DMZ services than we'd be able to get scalably with a pure hardware solution. And so on a really short deadline, we put all of our materials and our quotes together. We hit the submit button and we waited. And over here is part of what we got back for intellectual merit. And so on the good side, we had a good breadth of drivers. We got some survey results, but we didn't have enough details provided in terms of the end-to-end networking requirements, current network use. You can see it there. And so, you know, farther on our intellectual merit, here's some more of what we got back on intellectual merit. We've run out of strengths at this point, but the weaknesses just keep on coming. Organization and clarity, a lot more vagueness. And I've got yet another page of our strengths and weaknesses for 2019. And you might see a pattern developing here. You know, whether the reviewers were being polite or not, on our strengths, there was a lot of weaknesses identified, mostly in terms of the vagueness that we had in the eyes of the review panel. And so for broader impacts, kind of the same story. We got, again, a little bit better or a little bit more positive feedback on that one. It's basically the same situation as our intellectual merit. Good breadth, not enough details. And so overall, we got absolutely wrecked in the 2019 solicitation. You know, for our first run, though, some of our supporting materials that were not literally part of the intellectual merit and broader impacts, a lot of those came out pretty well, especially the CI plan, which again, short time frame, first time we'd ever put together one of these before, came out extraordinarily well in the reviews, and we'd never made one before. So let me drill into our CI plan setup for a bit, because I know some colleagues elsewhere that have had issues getting these kinds of things done. I'll just tell you what we did, because it wasn't real fancy. So in our situation, we were lucky enough that our CIO position and I both were former R&D engineers in 2 different research centers here on campus. And so that made it a whole lot easier in central IT to enlist the help of all of the directors that report to her. Okay. And so we were working on a really short timeline. I went over all of the sample CI plans I could find on ESNet at the time, just to find one that I could keep in my head and follow the structure of. And so we wound up on the one from Northern New Mexico College. That to me was the best one at the time. There's been some other ones added in since then. It could be, they could have better ones now. And so we also had a little bit of issue internally where we had to remind ourselves that we weren't writing a strategic plan for our board of trustees at the university. We're writing this for NSF panel reviewers who don't know any of our local jargon, any of our university internal branding, or you know, our 5-year, 10-year plan or anything like that. And so since we didn't have an existing CI plan to refer to, we sort of went in and we categorized the things that we had either already completed, things we were working on, or things that we had planned for the future into an overall CI plan structure modeled on Northern New Mexico's. And so we ended up with basically 5 main sections in this plan. And so the first one was introductory, 4 honestly boilerplate objectives that are generally probably common to any university IT organization. But note that number 2 on ours, we explicitly included the words both research and infrastructure, and that's going to tie in better with the DMZ and even the CC Star compute proposals as well. And so in our second section, we had a set of strategies. We made sure that every one of those strategies fit into at least one specific objective from the first section. And again, some of these strategies like virtualization, we had underway for years, if not a bit more than a decade, but we were still working on them. They were still valid. We weren't done with them. And so also notice that on strategies 1 and 2 here, These both relate to what a DMZ could help the university with, and they relate right back to objective number 2. So we're just sort of reinforcing the things that we had already talked about. Third section, we would list the state of each strategy and current state. And so we spent a lot of time, a lot of words, and a lot of inches of paper on our networking section, especially for this first one, since we were doing a DMZ proposal. And so that gave us the opportunity, especially for the DMZ project, to show the state of our network before we could implement a proper science DMZ. Now, after that, we had a list of what remained to be done on each strategy. We stuck in there, and again, this is our first plan, so it's not like, you know, I'm not going to BS y'all and say that we had this planned out years and years in advance, and this was just a continuation. This was brand new work. We said science DMZ is on our remaining strategies, and it was a credible, you know, narrative in here from section 1 on down. And so then in the 5th section, we gave some more details on how we were going to implement each of the items in those remaining strategies. So that was what we did in 2019. We basically updated it for 2020 for the CI plan. And so, like I said before, we didn't even get close to getting funded in 2019. And so round 2, 2020, had a few things change in terms of the faculty, in terms of some other things that we did, and it worked out much more successfully because we got that one. And so what did we learn from the previous year? What did we keep? What did we need to fix? Well, we kept the CI plan because that I was quite proud we got good marks on. We kept the central IT folks involved just as much as they were before. Got to have that for the CI plan, and honestly for making this a credible implementation. And we kept the basic DMZ architecture parts of this as well. Now, we knew from that pages upon pages of deficiencies that we had to have a lot more details in why we needed the DMZ and why we wanted to go the route that we would propose. So, full disclosure, we had a collaborating university nearby that was successful in a DMZ grant around the same time that ours failed. And so we got to look not so much at their CI plan, because we did that one well, but we got to look at how their proposal was structured so that we could sort of see where we might have missed some things and some things that we could, you know, borrow from to make ours better. And so we dropped back to a much simpler physical DMZ project without the software defined networking, without the extra virtualization things. And I don't want to dissuade anybody from being more forward looking than we were, but the team and I figured we'd have a better chance just getting the funding in and getting any improvements by proposing just the standard reference architecture implementation of a science DMZ. We got data on how clogged our commodity internet connection was, because it was. And we got a lot more details from our survey respondents about their needs and their pain points. Now, I'm not going to say that we had any opportunity to do, you know, precise testing of exactly how long a standard workflow took for a standard faculty, okay? This is still survey data. You know, it's subject to people's memories and feelings rather than being, you know, hard measurements, okay? So page 1, all the way through, we keep beating this drum of basically, you know, from an end user perspective, the internet is slow. How can we make that better? All through the proposal, just, you know, harping on the fact that in our situation with our infrastructure and our resources, our network connection is a constraint. And so the obvious implication there is that if we can get a separate connection for the research traffic to internet 2, for all of the heavy data and compute intensive research, that's going to alleviate some things. We got as much data as we could from our ISP's routers to see how much bandwidth we were using. And now we're not a major year-round residential campus, but so you can see how our bandwidth, especially that blue section at the top, you know, periodically drops up and down over the entirety of summer. Every weekend, the bandwidth drops when the students go home to the more metro areas. But you can see from this, we had an increasing trend of average bandwidth in fall 2019. You can see that we're just basically maxing out our download bandwidth on a regular basis. So both years, we had a lot of science drivers listed, okay? Now for the second year, one thing we did to make the reviewers' lives easier, we hope, was we made an honestly pretty dense summary table of common trends across our drivers. And so I'm borrowing design language from Edward Tufte's quantitative design or visual analysis of quantitative something. I've already forgotten all the book titles at this point. But you know, if you're a data viz nerd, you know Edward Tufte. And so that big summary table up at the top, you know, we have grouped it by, you know, we split it vertically by discipline. We've grouped all the people up that way. Horizontally, we have it grouped up by who's affected by the network problems or could be affected positively by the improvements. What are they doing in terms of network attributes that we can alleviate? And then finally, what would the DMZ provide that would improve their research? And so even without reading that legend below the table, people could see a lot of common threads among our researchers' needs. Okay. We also put a more verbose version of that driver's information in a summary table at the top of each driver. Now, both of those, I think, helped reviewers see the breadth and the depth of disciplines and the impact that a DMZ could have at our university. And so last thing, I've worked up a LaTeX template over at my GitHub. This complies with the current state of PAPG and hopefully can keep you from having to manually format some stuff amongst your PI team for NSF projects. Now, we have tested this on both Overleaf and Tech Live. I've got some sample PDFs over there that were generated from it. You can upload to research.gov and verify that their PDF processing actually finds, you know, your broader impacts, your lines per inch, and all the other stuff that needs to be handled in there, so you don't get, you know, rejected without review, quote unquote. All righty. I don't know how long that took because I forgot to turn on my timer, but.
Thanks, Mike. So Amit, you're.
Oops. All right. I'm going to share. Can you see my slides?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Right, so thank you for having me. My name is Amit Sharma. I'm associate professor in the Department of Physics at Wright State University, and we are in Dayton, Ohio. For folks who don't know, we are about an hour north from Cincinnati and approximately an hour west from Columbus. And it's also the town where Wright brothers were born. So that's the fame to the name here. So I thought I would talk about my personal experience with the NSF-funded HPC Cyberinfrastructure that we have here. And this is for both discipline-specific as well as interdisciplinary computing intensive research. And just give you a little bit of background and how we went about it. So back in 2013, the university realized that they needed to increase the element of scientific computation into the research portfolio. So university went with a cluster hire and hired people who were doing scientific computing in the field of physics, engineering, as well as applied math. They also realized that courses, computational courses, which were taught at both undergrad and graduate level, they needed to be moved to the next level. So they needed folks who would bring in the expertise and be able to teach computational courses at a more advanced level. And also a little bit later, it happened that the university started a new PhD program, which is titled IASM, which stands for Interdisciplinary Applied Science and Mathematics PhD program, which is primarily applied computational PhD program. And we also had close partnership with nearby institutions. So being in Dayton, we are right next door to Wright-Patt Air Force Base and Air Force Research Lab. So university gets a lot of funding from Air Force. And there were also a lot of overlap within the university between departments, as well as with the new interdisciplinary PhD program and other research programs. So there was a great need for folks who would do scientific computation. But well, there was all this need was there, but there was no centralized cyber infrastructure program at the university. Now, the university hired a whole bunch of people who can do scientific computation, but there's no infrastructure, there's no support for them. So someone like me who was coming from a national lab, I still had CPU time on federally funded supercomputing centers, so I was able to use that. And also, I was told that you could apply to OSC, which is the Ohio Supercomputing Center, if you needed CPU time. But that wasn't the ideal situation because we spend a lot of time doing code development and then training students. So we really needed something which is in-house. We have full control over it, and we get to decide who gets to run on it. And it essentially becomes an experimental tool for folks who are doing computational research. So in the first year, we thought we would go for an NSF-funded program for CI. This is where I realized that since there was no existing infrastructure, I had to go for it on my own. So I became the lead PI on this initiative. And in our first year, we were just 3 faculty members who decided that we'll apply for a grant. And we weren't successful in the first year. We're primarily because we were inexperienced, we were new faculty members, and we didn't have much grant writing experience. And also we weren't collaborating with somebody who was already successful, or maybe there was an existing program that we could just piggyback on. So it wasn't like that. So, but what did help was the proposal was reviewed, and we got a lot of feedback from the panel review, and that really helped. So the next time around, we dug into it in more detail and really looked at the comments very, very carefully, and just ripped apart the proposal that we had, find out all the deficiencies that was in the proposal. And then in the process, there were other faculty members who also got interested from various disciplines, bioscience, material psychology, community health, and so on, who said they would be potentially interested in using the CI. So we ended up having 12 faculty members who some of them were co-PIs and some of them were just on the proposal. And we also reached out to local community. There was interest from high school as well as community college. So we applied to the CISE, which is the Director for Computer and Information Sciences, and we were successful. We got the NSF grant, and it was through the Division of Computer and Network Systems and Directorate for Computer and Info Science and Engineering program. So this was the MRI grant. But the interesting thing was that my background was more of a user of such a facility. I do scientific computation in the field of plasma physics, atomic molecular physics, and quantum mechanical systems. But I did have experience in system administration. So managing the queuing system, managing user accounts, network, cluster management, and so on. So I did have experience on that side. So while writing the proposal, we really had to think on where would we house the cluster, who's going to pay for electricity, who's going to pay for the cooling of it, who will be the system administrator, and how are we going to fund the cluster. So I thought I would collect some of the thoughts on some of the things that we went through. So planning matters. Justification is extremely important, as anybody has written a proposal would know this. So why should you get a cyber infrastructure? Why do you need one? Why not use existing resources, either from the federal level or the state level? So we really had to justify and think hard that why do we need one at our site? Cost is also a big factor because there is a cost share commitment from the university. For MRI grant is 30% cost share. So the university has to come up with 30% cost share, which means you're going around to your department chair, maybe your dean and provost and VP of research, and asking them to commit thousands of dollars. And then like I said, the physical aspect of it, which is the housing and the administration. So are you going to hire a system administrator? Or if you're going to use existing IT resources at the university, then are you going to pay for their time? And things like those. So those are important. And we did put in all the details in our proposal, and I think that made the proposal stronger. Then the other aspect was the designing of the CI infrastructure. Who are the users, application scientists? Then if you're using it for education purposes, then what are the education needs? And then how big of a cluster do you want to go for? Sorry, there's a typo, it's HPC. So how big of a HPC versus the budget and the hardware configuration? We didn't want to go for $1 million CI. We had to be reasonable, and depending on how many people would be using and what is your student population and things that you're using it for. So we had to strike a balance there. And then we also have to think about sustainability. Once it's funded, once it's here, then there has to be institutional commitment. Remember, like I said earlier, there was no centralized HPC center or a CI infrastructure for research faculty or for folks who are doing scientific computational research. So it came all on us that we had to figure out how that in the long run, beyond the 3-year funding period, that this would be still supported. And we had to promise that sort of in our NSF proposal that this is how we're going to support it long term. So that planning had to go into the proposal. And then beyond the initial period, we also had to think about the upkeep and the upgrade requirement. So equipment life expectancy, and then if it goes bad, if you need to replace nodes or if you need to replace the hardware components, then who's going to pay for it? Where's the money going to come from for all of it? So being in the academics and being on the user side of things, I never tend to think on those lines, but then I had to become a CI facilitator. So I had to think along all these lines as well. And then once it's here, then it was not just a few users who were using it. We had many students who started using the instrument, and then who would be the support. So we could not hire somebody to be a full-time support staff just because the funding was not there for it. And like I said, since I had experience in this, I became the sysadmin managing data network queuing system, the load on the cluster as well as the user management. And then best practices is something that we can learn from these types of workshops, listening to all the folks who are dedicated CI facilitators help us learn as to the best practices. So this would be my final slide on this. Just some thoughts on this. What were the drivers for us? It is challenging, but at the same time, it's rewarding. The cyber infrastructure that we have is being used by many computational researchers, also lots of students, both at undergraduate and graduate level, and we are able to teach some HPC skills, which are generally not taught in any typical courses. This cyber infrastructure has been instrumental in many research projects that led to many publications, and like I mentioned earlier, be able to teach some skill sets which are important in the real world. We are considering expanding it, maybe have a cyber infrastructure, a dedicated cyber infrastructure, which is centrally managed, where the faculty does not have to come in and run it. But this would require investment into new areas of research, maybe data-driven scientific research, and folks doing bioinformatics are coming into the arena with us. And once there is enough demand, then we are thinking of expanding it further. So that was my last slide, and with this, I would stop my screen sharing. Thank you.
Thank you, Amit. So our final speaker is Scott Valcourt, and who, like me, often goes last just because our last names begin with a V. But Scott, if we were on a panel together as speakers, you'd still go ahead of me. So
That is true, yeah, which is kind of strange, but yeah, that doesn't happen too often. So yeah, not bad. Thanks, Bar. So I'm Scott Valcourt, and I looking on the list of participants, I know many of you, and probably a few of you are saying, "Well, wait a minute, Scott, you're wearing red. What's the deal?" And so I'm an associate teaching professor of computer science at the Rue Institute at Northeastern University. And Rue Institute is a graduate education and research and entrepreneurial campus in Portland, Maine. It's the newest campus in Northeastern's global network. And the background I have here is real. That is really the Atlantic Ocean behind me. And I'd have been outside. If this were 48 hours ago, I'd have been outside because it would have been 81 and 81% humidity. Today it's 58 and cloudy and it's freezing out there. So I'm in here instead. And you're going to hear an awful lot of the same things from Mike and Amit that I'm going to tell you. Because my story when it comes to CC Star predates CC Star. It goes back to 2007 when the EPSCoR community gathered together and had a conference in Kentucky to talk about cyber infrastructure for EPSCoR states. And at the time, I was at the University of New Hampshire. I was there for 28 years before I moved here to Maine. And towards the end of what was the New Hampshire BTOP build that I was leading in 2012, CC Star came out and the first awards were made. And the research development folks must have figured I didn't have enough to do in 2012 because they said, "Hey, Yale got an award in this program. We think this would be something that you should pursue." And lo and behold, that's where we went. And that was our first foray into building a science DMZ in the CC Star program. And the star for me truly is the wild card character because it was called CCNIE at the time. Then it became CC Star IIE, which was the second award that I worked with St. Anselm College, a small liberal arts college in Manchester, New Hampshire, to help build out a science DMZ with researchers there who were partnering with folks at UNH. And then in 16, the CC Star DNI CI engineer program was available and funded a full-time 1 FTE for 2 years to focus on leadership in cyber infrastructure, which is what we had in New Hampshire. And we're wrapping up now what is the CC Star Cyber Team, the 4th award that I've been involved in with the Massachusetts Green High Performance Computing Center, University of Vermont, and University of Maine, as well as University of New Hampshire. And that has spawned several other cyber team awards that are in progress right now all across the country. So it's been a long and fun history. And what's been exciting about CC Star and the campus cyber infrastructure program is there really is so much power that comes from this program, but you got to do your homework. You got to prepare. You got to plan. That's what I think Amit had in his slide, was you got to plan. And so where do you start? How do you begin? And what allowed us to be successful from the first proposal in 2013 for a science DMZ was we started off by asking not only ourselves, but musing amongst the community, what do we need? What's the right thing? I was joking a few months ago when Congress was starting the conversation around Washington, D.C., and whether it become a state or not. In New Hampshire is 50th in the nation for funding for anything having to do with education, including higher ed. And my joke was if Washington, D.C. became the 51st state, New Hampshire would be 51st in the nation when it came to funding for research and education. So there's huge need. There's a lot of resources that aren't there. And so the question became, where can we do the most good? And so in 2013, 2012, rather than do something that was, I guess, prescriptive as typically IT folks would do, and I was certainly one of those IT folks at the time, rather than say, this is what we're doing for you, aren't we great? I said, let's bring together the research community and ask them what they need. And that's the approach that we took. We gathered everybody into a big physics lecture hall. It's 400 seats. I think we probably had about 200 or so people there, and sort of started asking them one by one, come on up to the microphone and tell us, what are the things that they wish they had? What are the things they could do if they had new resources that they could access? And that's really the first point on this slide, is talk to your researchers. What are they doing now to complete their research? They're doing something. They're finding a way. It might not necessarily be the way that it should be or the way that people think it really is. Find out what reality is, and then ask them, what do they wish they had to make their research more successful? And what could they do new if they had access to new resources? If there was a new tool or connectivity to some location or partners they could bring on board, what could they then do in their research? And then don't necessarily say to those researchers, thank you very much, you've given us feedback and we'll go off and make things happen for you. Partner with them. Propose a solution that comes from the feedback they've initially provided and reflect it back and find out, is this really what you've asked for? Is this really going to meet your need? You're not going to be able to serve everybody, and you're not going to have the panacea that one change, now everybody is in happy land. But by engaging the researchers, we give them ownership into the development process. And one of the comments that came out of that step that we took back in 13 was the research community saying to us, wow, the IT folks have never asked us what we want. This is completely refreshing. And as I talk to other people as the years have gone by, that still is the case. And when the researchers start to build that relationship with the other folks across their campus, amazing things happen. And once that relationship was built, we were able to do even new things that we never had imagined before. So partner with your researchers to come up with the plan that you would propose to a program like CC Star. And you also heard this, I think both Mike and Amit indicated this, measure your network. If you don't have perf sonar on your network already, get it installed, start collecting some data. Figure out what typical data transfers look like. What's your network activity happen to be? How do you help provide some of the justification for what your campus needs by what you don't have or what you don't have enough of? Bits moving, storage, compute power, the researchers in the same location or nearby, put all those pieces in place. And ultimately map out, what are the routes? What are the ways people are engaging with one another? When we brought the researchers together, that's when we found out that there were partners across the country. There were partners down the road. I talk about the St. Anselm network that we built. That's our second science DMZ. The only thing that the researchers in that project were unhappy about was that as we were able to move the data without them having to get in the car and drive disks from Manchester to Durham, which is about a 50-minute drive across the highway. There are no east-west highways that are good in New Hampshire. They all go north-south to ski areas. So the only thing they didn't like was the fact that they didn't have to drive to Manchester and Durham anymore, which meant they didn't get to have lunch together as often as they wanted to have. Other than that, it was phenomenal. And they got more work done and they could move data right from their desk. And so those become powerful measurements that you can include as justification for why you should move in the direction that you're going. But no matter what, even though the program is called Campus Cyberinfrastructure, that's not the #1 goal of the program. Science is the goal. Science drivers have to be the key for whatever you propose. So what we did was we asked all of our researchers in that big 200-person meeting that we had back in 2013, everybody write a 1-page summary of what you do. What are the things that you wish you could do? What are the things you could do better if you had more resources or more activity or more access? And from those one-pagers, having been an editor and a writer of many proposals, it's easier to cut than it is to write and fabricate more data and more information that you're trying to put in your narrative. So take those science drivers, those one-pagers you get from your science researchers, and develop a narrative that emphasizes the science that can be done and the expansion of that science, but for the expansion of campus cyber infrastructure. That but for language was one that came out of the old BTOP program, that if you could only do things if only you had that kind of connectivity. And so you can only do science and expand that science, but for the expansion of that campus cyber infrastructure. Make it clearly compelling, and that will help the review panelists see what you're trying to accomplish and why what you're doing will actually have an impact going forward, where that investment will be. Mike really emphasized the CI plan and the things that needed to be in there and the successes that are there. Involving campus leadership absolutely has to be the key. Researchers that write a CI plan that doesn't involve the campus leadership will clearly be seen as not connected and in touch with a long-term vision for how this campus cyber infrastructure will live on after the initial investment. And that's key. Researchers, the review panelists need to see that this investment is going to grow and have a longer life than just the time period in which it's been invested. And there are CI plans that you can follow, and the solicitation typically has a link, but you can also go to ESNet, and on their website, you'll find sample CI plans that have come from other successful CC Star awardees that periodically update their CI plans to show, here's some models of what you can do. And no one of them is perfect for your institution, but you'll probably find little pieces that can help and serve as a model to write your own for your own campus, so that when you are saying this CC Star proposal fits into our long-term cyber infrastructure plan, it can be made clear where those connections might be. Use your resources. Take a look at your neighboring parties, and Amit described that as well, looking at either a neighboring institution or more than one neighboring institutions that may have gotten CC Stars before, or your regional network provider has probably been involved in part and parcel in some way to investments in cyber infrastructure, and they may be helpful in providing some of the initial documentation or measurements or feedback that you can include as part of your proposal. And find a previous CC Star awardee. Go to the list of awards that are out there on the NSF website, find an awardee, and ask them to give you some feedback on your draft proposal. There's so much value that comes when you have somebody else take a look at things. If you can't find anybody, call me. I'll give you some feedback. I'd be happy to do that. And that, of course, means that you've done exactly what Amit was saying in the last point on this previous to last slide, which was start early. Don't rush this proposal over the finish line. It takes time. It takes building the right team and information and story that needs to be told that justifies why the science is lacking without the resources that you need from campus cyber infrastructure. And that would then allow campus cyber infrastructure to be implemented into your campus and have another investment that moves forward from where you are today. My dissertation research looked at the 16 or 18 or so small institutions that had been awarded the initial CC Star program funds back in 14 and 15. And I had a PERC paper, which is published, and feel free to go take a look at it. There are 9 key factors that came out of that study of those small institution CC Star awardees that if you're a small institution and you are there, this may be useful to you. And there may be some points in here that I've already talked about a bunch of them, and there's some key items to include as part of the conversation that you want to share. But take a peek, and there may be something useful there, and I'm happy to help in any way that I can that goes beyond just this workshop. And I already have notes learning from my colleagues here on this panel, and that's the exciting part. Is there's always new things to learn and new opportunities that might be out there, and your story at your campus will be different than what our stories have been. But if there's things that might be common and connected there, there's some learning and some overlap that we can all share with one another. So, Bar, back to you.
Thank you, Scott. All right, so we have about 10 minutes left for questions. So anybody have a question? I'm assuming you can turn your mics on and ask questions. Getting a lot of comments on what people are presented. So while we wait for people to either step up or to post something in the chat, most of those from the three universities talked about institutional commitment. And I'm just wondering, how you went about getting that commitment. And I'd like to hear from both Hal and Alan about the importance of the institutional commitment with respect to getting the funding. So not sure who wants to step up and take that one first.
I'll just share with you my experience with getting the university to commit to cost share. So in our case, we decided that the proposal is going to be split between two colleges. We have College of Science and Mathematics, which houses physics, mathematics, and other disciplines, whereas College of Engineering, which has the engineering disciplines. So when we knew how much money would be needed for the cost share commitment, then we had to just go around. The department chair said, okay, I can pitch in this amount of dollar. Then we went higher up to Dean and then to the VP of Research. And the same thing was done on the engineering side. So combined all together, getting money from different pool would add up to the cost share commitment.
Yeah, I mostly let my boss find the cost share that wasn't my paycheck. Our only cost share that we've had to put out for is for an MRI that we've got pending for this year. And credit to Henry for an off-the-hand email in mid-November where he explained cost sharing. And oh, by the way, the people who maintain the HPC's salary can be counted as cost sharing. It's like, oh, now I could go ask for a real amount of money and our 30% actually starts looking like something rather than, a few, some small 5-figure numbers from here and there from different groups. But once we had that on the list, it wasn't a real big deal to get small 5 figures from one of our research centers that is going to be a big user of the DMZ. And also they have some HPC needs. Our College of Engineering, our College of Arts and Sciences, and our Office of Research, where we've got a new VPR also kicked in as well. And at least for the academic departments, given that they have not yet been charged a dime for resources, for the storage that we've got, for my salary, all of that was picked up with university-wide buckets of money. Then I think it was a reasonably easy sell for them.
Thanks.
So I mean, I'll just comment quickly that from our perspective, this I mean, there are two things that I'd like to highlight that were mentioned earlier. One is obviously this question about this issue of doing your homework is really important, right? I mean, it's very important to be able to make a compelling case by having data and a compelling need that you can articulate. I mean, that's true in general for any kind of proposal, but in terms of institutional funding, institutional commitment, I think when you're looking at infrastructure specifically, the key question is, how is this investment going to impact things longer term? And you really can't talk about that without talking about the equipment or the plans of the long-term plans of the institution and how this fits in with other things that are going on. So if it comes off as a kind of one-off investment that will be used for a short period of time, and then there's no real clear path forward for it, then that's going to be a harder sell.
Yeah, at our institution, the core details of what we did in the original science DMZ proposal has now become that set of paragraphs that has moved into the facilities and equipment side of every proposal that goes out that has some kind of network connection, because the science DMZ became the core tool that allowed HPC, large storage, data transfer activity that prior to 13 or 15 by the time we finished it was never possible without that. And after that, things started to flow, and then we started to have larger pieces of equipment that showed up in the area. I hear a tugboat screaming its horn behind me, so if you can't hear that, I'll just let you know the tugboats are running here in Maine.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that I'd like to mention is that we have a lot of experience developing and running cyber infrastructure, especially advanced cyber infrastructure, at our national laboratories. And our national laboratories are often eager to find collaborators in many different spaces at many different kinds of institutions. And so, if that, you can reach out to our national laboratories and talk with experts there about all kinds of things related to cyber infrastructure, related to computer science and mathematics, and I encourage you to do that.
Thank you. Alan?
So this is kind of a weird conversation for me, because most NSF programs actually don't allow cost sharing. It's actually explicitly prohibited. CC Star and MRI are different. And I don't do those programs, right? Kevin Thompson is our person for CC Star, and MRI is split across all the, but in terms of institutional commitments, the one place when it comes to people, it talks about, sort of professional development and things like that. And for some programs, they require sort of commitments from whether it's the university or a department chair, and that's really important in supporting the people. So I just want to emphasize that, is that getting sort of the support of, like I said, whether it's your department head or going up the line for your proposal, for whatever proposal for related to cyber infrastructure or whatever, that's just really important. So leave it at that.
All right, so another quick question. So planning ahead, so Hal brought that up, and it turned up in several people's presentations about making sure to plan out ahead of time, doing the network measurements and things like that. So I'm just wondering, and maybe this is more towards Hal and Alan, the importance of having a conversation with the program officer ahead of time. I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
So I can start with that. That's actually pretty easy. So again, what happens at NSF is a lot of times you don't know sort of what's the right program or what's the right part of NSF to apply to, right? So as program directors, it's a really good idea to talk to program directors, right? Because then you get a feel for sort of whether or not what you're proposing fits within the program, fits within the division, fits within the directorate even. And we have that problem because a lot of the times it's whether, does this fit better in physics, or is there enough cyber infrastructure components that it actually fits in OAC, right? We get things like that. But then it's also a question of whether it's more of a development project for a program like the CSSI, Cyber Infrastructure for Sustained Scientific Innovation Program, or if it's really a research program. And that's where talking with program officers is really important, because we can't comment on the quality of the proposed work, right? Because that's the job of the, at NSF, it's all about peer review, right? But we can tell you whether or not it fits within the program, it fits within the division, and that helps get your proposal to the right place.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just second that. That's it is very important to reach out to people, especially if there's any question about scope. And we are, generically speaking, very happy to talk to people and provide that kind of feedback. Now, as Ellen said, the kind of feedback we cannot provide, right, is do you like this idea? Do you think this is a great thing to do? Well, that's something that the peer review panel is going to provide feedback to us on, and we're not going to want to preempt that feedback. But we will be happy to talk to you about the kinds of things that you are planning to do, and whether that scope is appropriate for different kinds of programs. And we encourage you to reach out to us about that.
All right. Thank you very much. And so we are now at 3:45, which is the end of our session. So thank you very much, and give thanks to the panelists. You shared a lot of really important information to this group. So thanks again, and really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks. Yep. Thanks for having us.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you.
Thank you all for a terrific panel. This has been fantastic, and I think we've gotten a great deal out of it. So I'm going to stop our recording, and we will be reconvening in 30 minutes for the final session of the week, which is our Stories from the Trenches session. We'll be doing a roundtable swapping cyber infrastructure facilitation stories and learning from one another about our experiences.